Atlantic. And before you did go, oh, I promised you that I'd hold you and beg you not to do so. But I let you go. Set your sails up and prayed the winds to blow. I like to pretend that I'm a merciful siren. Look out for the rock that I'm singing upon. Well, I'll mend your ship the very day that you wreck it. Though it may take some time, oh, to get to know this old shipwright, then I will bid thee good fortune, and I will bid thee farewell, farewell. I'll leave a ghost at the helm to guide you through the realm. For here there'll be monsters. I don't deny that I'm worth. All I ask is that you name it for its birth before you make it. I did build it not just to watch you go, Name it Arthur, name it for the sea. Name it Arthur, name it after me. Name her Arthur, name her for the sea. Name it Arthur, name her after me. Name it after me, name her after me.
Welcome, everybody. It is a pleasure to see where everybody is joining from. I am Jason Haas, as you can see on your screen. I'm partner and general manager out here. I am joined by the two senior members of our winemaking team, executive winemaker Neil Collins and senior assistant winemaker Chelsea Franchi. So this is our third virtual pickup party, I think. But the second one that we've done in conjunction with an actual live pickup party, which happened here a couple weeks ago. But we realized during COVID that these sorts of virtual events, they were accessible to a whole different group of our fans than the live events were, and it feels totally complimentary for us to continue to do these, even though we've restarted our in-person events. So thank you for joining. I love that there are people coming from the East Coast, Georgia, from Pennsylvania, from Indianapolis, from Colorado. Super, super cool. So thank you for being here, everybody who's here. So I know that some of you are have ordered the little wine kits that we made with Master of the World. Chelsea is our kit model tonight.
I'm so happy these are in my house.
So these were, if you ordered these, great. They are quarter bottles of each of the 6 wines, so 187 milliliter bottles. Do you want to hold one of them up?
Yeah, she does.
I do. I want to touch it.
This is the first time that they have done our labels on them, and I think that they are totally adorable. So just be conscious as you are going through. If you are doing these, we are going to go in the order in which they were packed in the box, from left to right. Cote, Roussanne, Patelin, Blanc, and then the 3 reds. Be conscious of the fact that there is a quarter of a bottle. So if you are there with one other person and you're finishing all 6 of these, that's a bottle and a half of wine. Just know this. I assume you're doing this from the comfort of your homes, which is awesome. But we also know that based on past events, only about half of the people who are joining actually got the wine kits. And so I know a lot of you are going to be either opening a bottle or 2 from the shipment that we sent, or just opening something you had in your cellar and coming for the stories and to ask questions and to learn what's going on. And that's great too. There's no wrong way to do this. Unless you ordered a kit for yourself and you finish all 6 bottles, in which case you probably won't make it to the end. But there are worse things than that too. Cool. We are going to be interspersing tastings of the wines with a little talks about what we've been working on at the Vineyard over the last 6 months. If you do have questions, these are, I think, so much more fun when they're interactive. I love seeing the questions and comments already streaming in. Ian Consoli, who's our director of marketing, he's at the switchboard, so he's going to be feeding us questions as they come in, or comments as they come in. So please do lob in the questions that you have, and we will do our best to get to all of them. Cool. So one of the lessons that we learned from the first one of these, when we talked about all of the things that we've been working on for the first hour and only then started tasting the wines, was that that really wasn't a very good way to organize it. And we should intersperse the tastings of the wines in between the stories that we have. So I encourage you, if you are going in order, pour yourself a glass of the 2020 Cote de Tablas Blanc. I'm going to do the same thing. And let's talk about that and then jump into some of the other things. So, Neil, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of the idea behind the Cote Blanc?
Wow, like the original concept behind Cote Blanc. So Tablas Creek originally starting with the lofty goal of making 1 red and 1 white wine in total back in the beginning. That proved to be a bit impractical, particularly once we started having a tasting room and a wine club, etc. And also trying to make a very specific wine with so many varietals. I think it became really clear to all of us. Of course, Bob, Jason's dad, was still here back in those days. And so we decided to go for a second red and white, not unlike, I suppose, Chateau de Beaucastel and the Beaucastel itself, and then the Coudelet de Beaucastel, which Bob also had a very big hand in, I've been told over the years. So just decided to make a wine that was different. The Esprit always being based very much as a Roussanne wine. These days, sometimes all of the whites of the Chateauneuf. So deciding to make the Cote Viognier based, which Viognier not technically being one of the 13 or 14 of Chateauneuf, but certainly a player in the Côte de Rhône in a big way. So I think it was about 2001 or somewhere in there, we pulled the Viognier from the Esprit anyway. So the perfect home for it was a second white blend, which was the Cote, which is always based in Viognier and then has all the other players, depending on the year, in this wine also. Usually, I'll let Chelsea speak a little bit on the vinification, but usually a lot of stainless steel ferment, some wood, but particularly these days, now the Viognier spends a lot of time in ovals and eggs and many vessels, but a lot of stainless steel, not a lot of oak impression on this wine, but really displays the character of Viognier from this site, I would say, is what it's grown to be and what the original goals were.
Yeah, Chelsea, you want to talk about how about the winemaking of it?
Yeah, I do love that the Viognier from our property isn't quite as over the top as some Viognier can tend to get sometimes, especially in warmer climates. The Viognier that we make, I love that it still has that like lime leaf character to it to kind of balance out that really intense stone fruit character that Viognier can carry so easily. With the vinification, as Neil mentioned, we do a lot of stainless steel fermentation, and if there is any oak, it's neutral oak. So you're not going to get a lot of that woody character in this wine, but you do get the softness because we have been fermenting the Viognier in the concrete eggs for the last couple of years, mostly because Viognier is one of the first varieties to come in. And we're just so excited to use the eggs that Viognier just ends up going into the egg. It's not exactly, I do really like the mineral character and the softness that we get from that. So maybe our excitement to use the eggs is the right choice. But I do think it lends itself really nicely to this wine, especially with kind of those really bright, energetic varieties that we're using just to kind of mellow things out a little.
And I think that's an important thing about this wine that I think is worth mentioning is that it's not a straight Viognier. I mean, it is a wine which is led by Viognier, and Viognier is
Grenache Blanc this year.
There's a lot of Grenache Blanc, and that's one of the things we always talk about when we're doing the blending is, does the Viognier need more of Grenache Blanc's like vibrancy and acidity, or does it need more of Marsanne's elegance and low alcohol and minerality? And it always gets a decent chunk of both. But in 2020, when the Viognier and really all of the wines were pretty lush and luscious, it seemed like the acidity of Grenache Blanc was maybe a little more important to prioritize than the elegance of Marsanne. So that's how you get the blend that you see on the screen is led by Viognier, but a decent chunk of Grenache Blanc for brightness, decent chunk of Marsanne for elegance and minerality, and then just a little bit of Roussanne, some of the less unctuous Roussanne that goes nicely with that Viognier.
Well, I think it's leads to a pretty good example of what we do, in that we're always looking for a balance in these wines from a given vintage. So what we put in them is very, very much dictated by what the vintage gave us. So if we need a little bit more acidity, then that Grenache Blanc will take a bit of a bigger lead. If we need to richen it up a little bit, which is pretty unlikely with Viognier, but if you did, there's Roussanne to play that game too. So it's a matter of balance, as with all things we do, is, with all of the floral characters and lime leaf and all that is important, but the core of everything to me is always balance, and getting those wines balanced with acidity and weight and a feel that is very Tablas Creek, and always showing at least a bit of that great minerality that's the hallmark of this vineyard.
Absolutely. And it is one of the most friendly wines that we make, I think. Everything else has a seriousness to it. I mean, the Esprit obviously has that elegance and that poise. And all of the varietal wines that we produce have their own spot. But to me, Cote is just always, it's always like right in that sweet spot of just being so friendly and so drinkable. And I think it's that Viognier lead. It's
one of the wines that I don't reach for frequently. And when I do, I wonder why I don't reach for it more, I would say.
There was a comment that I'd love Ian to pull up from Carlos Stalgis, who said, interestingly, we like the Cote White more than the Esprit. And like, that doesn't make me upset ever. I think it's really important that each wine has its own identity, and that it be something that we can aim lots at because it's right for that wine, not because it wasn't good enough to go into the Esprit. And we don't use Viognier or Marsanne in the Esprit Blanc. So the Cote Blanc gets the best Viognier and the best Marsanne. It is not a second wine to the Esprit. It's just a different take on the white grapes from the Rhone Valley. So like don't at all feel bad about it. I feel like people need to feel like they need to apologize if they say that they like one of our less expensive wines more than they like the Esprit, and they're designed to have their own personality. So I think that's kind of a fun thing to highlight.
I mean, I think it's important to realize one of the big points of Tablas Creek is everything is grown in the same way on this same estate in these great soils and climate. And it's not like we try any harder to vinify one thing over the other. We try our best to make the best possible wine. So, I mean, as you rightly say, it's a variation. It's not one is particularly better or worse necessarily in many ways. Of course, Roussanne's a lot harder to get to and produce a beautiful wine out of. Viognier, always there, always ripe early, first thing to come off. So it's always easy to play with. As long as you get it early enough. If you leave it too late, that's the problem for me with Viognier, because then it just gets fat and lazy.
Like any of us, if you leave us out
Absolutely.
there.
Grapevines aren't that different from us in the end.
So a quick question from Sarah, who says, this is amazing. Is there any left for club members? So there is a little bit left. I think we may have marked it as sold out on the website because we were down to the last like 10 or 12 cases. So if there is something that if this is something that you want, you should call the wine club office, because we do have a little bit stashed, but it may be showing as sold out on the website. Okay. So the wines, jumping back into kind of the bigger narrative, the wines that we're going to be showing in this shipment, the wines that we're going to be talking about span 2019, 2020, and 2021. And I'm hoping that Neil and Chelsea, you might talk about how you characterize the different vintages, whether like in a sentence or two, or in a superhero metaphor, or in really some way. Like how would you differentiate 19 from 20 from 21?
I don't even know what a superhero metaphor is. So I'll let Chelsea go with that one.
I mean,
let me get my cape.
I think if the option is to describe things in a superhero metaphor, you have to go with that rather than just a few sentences. So I think for 19, my favorite superhero is Batman. I think 19 has that deep, dark, texturally graveliness. I think the reds are a bit more brooding in style and intensity. I think, 19 is going to be Batman. I think 20 for me is going to be Superman. I think it's like just unbelievably handsome, like tragically handsome, and surprisingly broad-shouldered. And I do think that there's a little bit of a surprise element in 2020, because typically, it's funny, I feel like it's usually the odd number years where you have that power and that structure. And 2020 for me is kind of one of those surprises where it's kind of like that little Clark Kent switcheroo, where it's, 2020 is an even number year, but it does have that big broad-shouldered character. And 2021, while not technically a superhero, I think she's actually a villain. I think I'm going to go with Catwoman. I think 2021 has a little bit more of that live, muscular character, but it's got a prettiness to it. It is a little hard-edged right now, especially because they're not finished with the reds necessarily yet. But I think 2021 is going to be kind of one of those kind of sneaky powerhouses. Final answer.
Awesome. Okay, and Neil, do you want to talk in more maybe?
Like I can add anything to that?
I mean, I'm not going to try to make something more evocative than that, because I think that was absolutely perfect. But if you had to give people a couple of things to note about what caused the character in those vintages, what would they be?
I mean, as my memory serves me, 19 was coming off at least a bit of water, a bit of rain in the winter. There you go. Look at that. That's Tablas Creek flowing down into the lake here on the Tablas Creek property. And that's a pretty good flow. It gets a lot bigger than that too, which maybe we got a picture of that as well. But we were coming off a pretty good winter in 19, so there's some water. I think throughout these vintages, though, for me, there's definitely a mark of dry weather. I mean, they're all pretty rich and to use a Chelsea term, broad-shouldered, I guess would be a good way to put it. There's a certain amount of weight to these wines, white and reds going through that I find, and I think that's somewhat to do with the fact that we really haven't had an immense amount of rain. I don't remember any of the vintage being aggressively hot. It got hot towards the end of the year, but the spring times were not marked by frost, which is a fantastic thing for us and a moment that we're in the middle of right now, worrying about that, the cold weather coming in next week. But I find them all to be fairly big, and they're not powerful, but they've certainly got a weight behind them, yet they carry great complexity. They're pretty even vintages to me going through. Probably the 19 is most different than the group, though really early, obviously, to be making any grand statements on the 21 reds for sure. I mean, the 21 whites were definitely had some weight behind them, particularly in the Roussannes. I felt nice and balanced, but not faint wines.
Yeah, I think these wines are all going to be, they're going to end up being fairly substantial, fairly age-worthy vintages. 19 may be the most of any of them. It is, those feel to me to be really wines built for the long haul.
I think it's a thing we're running into, that we're getting a little less rain than we've been used to over the decades, and fortunately we've missed frost, so we've gotten away with this a little bit. But with a little lower yields, which is giving us some of that weight, a frost event becomes even more frightening. Really, you don't have the growth to bear it later in the season, so that makes me even more nervous. I spoke to Frank Norelli, who's an old local farmer today, and was telling about us worrying about frost, and his comment was, it's a new moon the next 2 months. We don't have to worry. I was like, okay, I'll try and stop worrying.
I wish I had his confidence.
Yeah. He's been out longer than us, so we'll hope he's right.
And 20 was a year that was kind of a cool landmark. Ian, did you find that picture? Yeah, there we go.
I know what that is.
So that is our entire harvest of Muscardin from 2020, which was the first year that we got that 14th and final Chateauneuf variety into production. So it was sort of it was a year that was obviously a hard year. We were operating under pandemic conditions. There was that crazy heat spikes in the summer. There was the fires that struck all over California.
Chelsea was missing.
Chelsea disappeared for like
a year.
3 months towards the end of the year, and returned with a baby. Like, amazing. Talk about superhero.
Baby's pretty broad and round too.
But it was a year that we felt like we came out of that vintage with all of this cool stuff to show people. And that Clark Kent analogy is, I think, a fun one, because it reminds me, 2020 reminds me a little bit of 2003, in that it was a vintage that our first impression of it was like that it was so friendly and cheerful and juicy that like it couldn't be that serious. And then the more time we spent with it, the more serious it got. That feels like where 2020 is going. And then 2021, it's early. I mean, the rosé that we'll try in a little bit, I think, is great. Super fun and bright and cheerful. But the whites that we just finished the blending on, which we'll talk about in a little bit, those were serious, dense. The Roussanne was powerful. It's going to be really long-lived white wines.
There's a question from Frank there, which I'll field. We spend a lot of time looking at weather reports. I spend less time now, probably. In the earlier days, it was a phone-up weather station we used to call her Mabel. And I would be up every night calling every hour on the hour on a frost night to figure out what was going on. Now there's so many options that I rarely look at the weather anymore because I've got Jason calling me and my son Austin calling me and Jordy calling me, and everyone's calling me about the weather and telling me what's going to happen. So I've got automatic weather stations, but we spend a lot of time, particularly Jordy and Austin will be looking at the weather at least every hour on a potential frost night, just to make sure they're ahead of the game. And once you know it's coming, you can't sleep anyway. So a lot of time is spent, particularly on nights where we know there's a danger of frost, looking at those stations. And that's when I do watch, because I'm also nervous during those moments. We've been, touch wood, we've been very lucky over the last few years and haven't had a serious frost, and that's a good thing.
Yep, for sure. Well, let's dive into the second wine, which is our 2020 Roussanne. It'll also give us a chance to answer a couple of the questions about the 2020 vintage. You'll notice the beautiful template that has all this room for other grape varieties under 2020 Roussanne, but this is, of course, a 100% Roussanne.
We could have given it 100% there somewhere just to fill in the space.
So Roussanne was the first white wine, really. It was the first Rhone variety of either color that we bottled varietally. We just had the cool experience last year of just diving into that 2001, which was the first varietal Roussanne that we made, and finding it kind of a revelation, just beautiful and still vibrant and mature, but not at all old or tired at age 20. So I feel like this is maybe going to be along a similar path. This is one of the more substantial Roussannes that we've done in recent years. Obviously, we lead, the Esprit Blanc always leads with Roussanne. So, Neil, do you want to talk a little bit about how we think of the varietal Roussanne differently than we think of the Esprit Blanc?
Yeah, I mean, Roussanne itself is a great variety that we probably think differently than anything else. It's certainly the most difficult for me in a vineyard sense, in that its ripening is so uneven. So we will go through and make multiple picks from a given block, which is challenging. So if you look at the harvest board when you're here, you'll see Roussanne NF 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are 4 different picks that we try and select just at optimum ripeness so that we can make the best possible wines. And those are all vinified separately and then tasted blind within our blind tastings coming to the blends. And it's everyone always tends to think, you pick the best stuff for the Esprit. That's not necessarily the case. We pick the wines that are most appropriate for the Esprit to go in the Esprit, which may be different than the Roussanne. As all of our club members will surely know, we don't really use a lot of new oak in anything we do. Roussanne may be the exception of where you'll see more oak than anything else. It's always a long air dried oak, a gentle oak, a lighter toast oak. So it's not your classic toasty flavors that you would see. And generally, a lot of that oak characteristic will go into the Roussanne varietal. Newer barrels will often end up there, not always. And the Esprit itself has crept up in its oak component a little bit since about 16, when we felt it was appropriate to have a little bit of wood in the background of that wine. So I would say if there's a Tablas Creek wine that you'll feel our selection of oak barrels upon, it would be the Roussanne. I mean, if you're going to go to reds, then the Pinot and the Syrah. But in the white wine world, the only wine in my mind that has any real significant quantity of oak would be the Roussanne, though you can get a light perception of it in the Esprits.
And I think the reason for that is, Roussanne already has this like candy and honeysuckle character. It's just like honey in every description in every possible way. And if you put it in wood, that wood just carries that so nicely. So it helps to balance things out and bring a little bit more power to the back end, because that front end is so floral and so honeyed and delicious. And the wood tan, it almost lends like a tannic feel to it. So it does give you that really nice round mouthfeel, like the full experience from start to finish. And in this wine, you definitely do get a lot of that wood character. or maybe not a lot, but you feel it. And I think it lends this beautiful texture to the wine that it might not have otherwise. I think the characteristic of Roussanne just goes so beautifully hand in hand with wood. I think it's definitely, I love a little bit of new oak on Roussanne. Not a lot.
I think it's a pretty good observation for people, because people do tend to relate oak in wine directly to the toastiness of oak in wine, because so many wines in the past have been, it's that toast that marks a wood character. And in this wine in particular, tasting it now, you feel a lot of those lighter toasted flavors that they're not burnt wood. It's a very unique flavor that's appropriate for the Roussanne for sure.
There's a question from Sarah asking how long we should wait for the Roussanne to peak. This is one of the great mysteries in the world of wine. So if you're interested, we did a vertical tasting of Roussanne last year. If you want to get a sense of what it's like at 5 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, 20 years old. And it's up on our blog. So if you do a search for like Roussanne vertical tasting, you'll find that. And it's sort of a question of like, what do you like? What do you like in Roussanne? Because if you like this kind of like pear and fresh honey character that it has when it's young, like drink it when it's young. But what happens is that honey character kind of caramelizes to something that's a little more like creme brulee, and yet it doesn't get oxidized and heavy, and the minerality comes out more. It becomes something different and wonderful. So it's hard to give a firm answer. But my suggestion always with a wine like this is, if it's something that you love, get enough of it that you can watch it over time, because it's not that it's going to be better at one stage than another. It's just going to be different and interesting. So, yeah, there you go. You could go out 20 years if you wanted, but it doesn't mean you have to wait 20 years. Everybody always, when they hear this, a wine can be aged 20 years, I think that sometimes frightens people off. My analogy is always like, don't you want a car that could last you 20 years? Like, it's probably going to give you fewer problems along the way. It doesn't mean you need to wait 20 years to drive it. Don't be afraid of having it. So, okay. The comment that Ian pulled up, which I think he probably was hinting to us that we need to get our chef and featured guest involved in this. So
I thought he was saying eat.
Can you bring in Jeff? Because we have Chef Jeff Scott here, who has made a pairing to go specifically with the Roussanne, and I would love him to answer that question. How you pair with Roussanne, what he made, and why.
Well, hi, how are you guys? Nice to see you. Hi, Neil.
Hey, Jeffrey.
I pair foods with nice acidity with Roussanne, because the Roussanne has such a unctuous character to it. At the end of the day, we look at fat and acid in food and wine pairing, and so lemony flavors. Somebody just mentioned, I think at the beginning, a little fresh cut pear that they did with the Cote Blanc. I love that idea, pear and Roussanne being great pairings together. Today we did an old classic salmon rillette, and beautiful French recipe, taking lightly cooked salmon, folding it. Because it's French, you basically fold it into butter, and lots of butter. And using
a bit more butter.
Yeah. Using a little Pernod and shallot and creme fraiche and lots of lemon. And you let that sit for a couple of days in the refrigerator, and it gains kind of a fresh complexity and flavor.
Do you have food, Chelsea?
I'm so hungry.
Well, that's a bummer. So good and so much butter.
But I've got these cute bottles.
You do.
And so we served it over toasted brioche as part of the white wine pairings at the pickup party, or the VINsider party earlier a couple weeks ago. And I was telling Jason, I was walking through the hallway here at Tablas, and there was a bunch of citrus sitting in some boxes. And so I thought, even though it's off script, I put a little bit of Cara orange on top of it. You can do that type of thing. And for our recipe, it's topped with candied citrus. You guys get the kind of funness of the candied citrus on your palate?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful balance. Great with the Roussanne. I love that citrus with the Roussanne. It really livens the Roussanne too.
Livens the Roussanne up a little bit. And the richness of it also goes well with the Cote Blanc, because the Cote Blanc with the acidity. And I wanted to ring in and say I absolutely love the Cote Blanc and have for years. And I don't know if you remember, Neil, we were on a ski trip in Park City, and we had gone to a great restaurant, and Cote Blanc was on the wine list. And next morning after we had lunch there, we decided to go back again. They had the best pork belly tacos I've ever had. And so I couldn't wait to order them again. And I woke up and I said, I'm going to have those pork belly tacos again. And you looked at me and you said, I think I'm going to order a bottle of the Cote Blanc.
And so we did.
And so we did. But I think that, kind of getting back to the recipe, do you see the chive being a key player in it? The chive kind of creates the bridge between the citrus and the richness of the butter and the salmon, gives it a little bit of sharp edge. Rillettes are really easy to make, salmon rillettes. It's a great way to use the belly and the end parts of salmon if you're buying a whole side of salmon, and keeps in your refrigerator for several weeks really, really well, and only gets better, which is kind of almost counterintuitive to a fish dish. How does it get better with time? But actually it does, because it's preserved in the butter. And so great thing to serve when guests come over. You can have it ready to go. Just even some toasted fresh baguette is great with it too. And kind of a nod to an old French classic with a little bit of citrus to give it a new look. That was my thought.
Lovely. One of my favorite stealth pairings with Roussanne is things with spice, because it's sort of like you mentioned the importance of the chives, Jeff, where you have a little bit of bite. I mean, Roussanne sort of floats right over spice, so it's really good with like Indian curries and things that can be often really hard to pair with wine, because it doesn't get washed out by the spiciness of food.
Isn't that great? It really kind of has broad shoulders when it comes to different spices, and even some Moroccan foods can be really nice with it too.
Excellent. Cool. Okay. So Jeff, we will be back with you in a couple of wines for the red pairings.
Okay, I will go back to the kitchen.
Thank you so much for for presenting this one and for feeding me, because I was hungry too.
Says Chelsea.
You can, I don't know, maybe you can forward
She's
to Trevor the recipes that are on our website.
You should just have Trevor whip you up some salmon rillettes. I hear it's quite easy.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got the butter. So
Yeah, sure.
Cool. So what temp would you recommend serving the Roussanne? So Roussanne is, I think, perfect at cellar temperature. I don't think it's something which is great right out of the fridge. It's a wine that's like, one of the most important characteristics about it is its texture. And that texture tends to be thinned out by serving it super cold. But nor do you want it at room temperature. That's too warm. So sort of that in between, that cellar temperature, 55, 60 degrees for me is perfect for Roussanne.
Really kind of close to red for me, really, too. I mean, I like red's a little cooler than many, maybe, but it falls more in that category to me for, as you're saying, for that, to allow that texture to be apparent and not mute some of those nuanced aromas.
Yeah, it feels like in a lot of ways Roussanne, it's a white that kind of thinks it's a red. I mean, it's true with the way that we treat it in the cellar. Also, it likes to be in wood. It likes to breathe. It likes time. And same thing when you're drinking it. It sort of likes to be treated like a red.
Well, and I think that's an interesting point, Jason, because you were talking about that 20-year-old Roussanne that just kind of blew all of our minds. And one of the things that we were talking about was the importance of decanting aged whites, which is something that I don't always remember to do that. And then once you have it in your glass for, 20 minutes, all of a sudden you're like, this thing is just spreading its wings. And I wish I would have gotten it air a little bit sooner. So I do think in many cases, it behaves like a red. And a lot of people we don't give it that opportunity.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about what we've been working on most recently in the cellar, which is blending the 2021 whites. So we've touched on it briefly, but what would you say that we've learned about that 2021 vintage? Oh, there's the harvest chalkboard and the bottles. What were your take homes from the blending week, Chelsea?
The 2021 whites that we've gone through, I absolutely love the distinctive varietal character that each one of the varieties has. I feel like, having so many different varieties working with the 2021 vintage, each and every one of those personalities of those varieties are so unique and so diverse. And going through the blind tasting, we know when we're tasting Roussanne, and then we know when we've moved to Grenache Blanc, and we know when we've moved to Marsanne. But within these different categories, I mean, every single one of them was just so stand up and so stand out. The intensity and the beauty that, in particular, the Roussanne carried was extremely exciting. And I feel like when you have those vintages where the Roussanne is really great and the Mourvedre and the Counoise are really great, those are kind of markers of vintages that are going to be really, really strong performers. So I feel like going into that first experience of tasting through every single lot in a sit-down focused environment just made, I think, all of us really excited around the table, because all of a sudden you're like, oh, these are good Roussannes. You know what that means? So I feel like after that, especially after that second day of tasting, when we had gone through everything, it was just like, we have very little of it. The vintage was scarce. But with that, we didn't have a lot of fruit that we brought in, and we had a lot of people. We had a lot of help in the cellar. And if you think about how many people we had and how much fruit we had, all of a sudden, every single one of those lots that came through the cellar door got a lot of care and attention. And there was a lot of excitement. People just really wanted to be part of everything. And so when you give so much attention to every single lot, I do think you're going to see a difference in the final product. And sitting in on that initial blending, I do think it showed.
Awesome. Yeah. So Neil, kind of translate that to this rosé that we're going to be tasting next. Do you think that the rosé has how does this reflect 2021, if you feel like it does? Or is the Patelin rosé just kind of what it is, because its personality of the wine is so well defined from year to year?
Well, I think obviously the first thing that stands out with the Patelin rosé is it's not 100% from the estate. So that allows a different picture of what we're seeing here for sure. I mean, when you're picking fruit from whatever we are these days, 300 acres and contiguous acres, you're very much impacted by what that season gives you. When you have what we do with the Patelin, where we're reaching out to vineyards that are a bit not much farther afield, but they are a little bit farther, then you have more blendability, I would say. I mean, I think the Patelin in this vintage shows great brightness and great acidity. I think it's a great character of this wine. Second year of Amanda in the cellar being kind of the lead on the rosé, but this time having Chelsea right there with her. I think there was a lot of great attention paid on this rosé, both with Chelsea, who's been leading the rosé program for a long time, and Amanda, who jumped in Chelsea's absence last year and then continued a little bit this year. But the fact that we picked these direct press, we picked them early, we're not letting them get to the ripeness where we would let Grenache get if we were making a red wine. So I think every year we're going to see this vibrancy, this electricity that comes from that early pick and then a direct press. So it's almost like you're making a white wine in so many ways. And that really shines through to me, vintage to vintage, on this wine.
One of the things that I think is worth pointing out for everybody is that normally we would send out the Dianthus rosé in our spring wine club shipment. That's what we've done most years for the last since we started making it in 2012. But that was one of the changes that we made to try to adjust to what was a really short vintage. So Chelsea mentioned it was scarce. It was off by 26% overall, and the early grapes, kind of the Grenache Blanc, Vermentino, Viognier, those were off by 35 or 40%. So it was really the Roussanne and the Mourvedre and the Counoise that were only off 5 to 10% that kind of saved us for the vintage, because we were pretty worried 3-4 weeks in that we were going to be looking at a vintage that was off by more than a third. So one of the things that we did was just decide to cut back on the amount of dianthus that we made in order to preserve more wine to make red out of in 2021. Another that people will notice is that we would normally often send out the Vermentino in the classic shipment in the spring. We did not make enough Vermentino to send a bottle to each of our wine club members. Our Vermentino crop was off by almost 50%. So we did have to make some choices. Luckily, with the Patelin Rosé, we realized things were going to be scarce, and we were able to reach out to a handful of additional growers with whom we have handshake agreements and make more of it, so we could make enough Patelin Rosé to send out to you all. And I love the way that this turned out. This is one of my favorite Patelin Rosés that we've done. When you describe to people the difference between the dianthus and the Patelin, either there's a toss-up, either Neil or Chelsea, how do you do it? Because most people don't think of wineries as having multiple rosés. Like, you make your rosé, and if you think about that more deeply, it's kind of silly, because like nobody would think that it's odd that you make multiple white wines or multiple red wines, and there's long traditions of rosés in different parts of the world. So when you describe the difference between these rosés, how do you do it?
Chelsea, that's yours.
I think it kind of depends on who you're talking to. I mean, if it's somebody that is familiar with, a rosé tradition in France, dianthus is kind of our ode to more of a Bandol rosé, where it's got a little bit more structure and intensity, like much deeper and richer complexity. The flavors, aromas are just a little bit more sunk in, and I think you get a lot of that from just time on the skins. And the fact that also it's all of our estate lots, it's all of our top quality red lots that come through the cellar door, kind of knowing that these are typically lots that are destined to go into a spree and Panoply. So we have the best fruit that goes into our dianthus, which is not typically the case with a lot of rosés. With the Patelin Rosé, this is more of a Provence style rosé, so much lighter, much more delicate. Definitely lower alcohol. So if you're thinking about a day drinking rosé, this is the one that I would recommend. Dianthus can be a bit of a heavy hitter, and great with food. But the Patelin, it's so much more delicate in every sense of the word. We only get about 2.5 hours skin contact for the most part. It's about 85% direct press. And the Saunier fruit that we do use is only on the skins basically for 2 hours, 3 hours. So it goes into tank and then we bleed it directly off. This rosé, though, it has this lightness on its feet and this energy that I don't know that we get with the dianthus. So it's just two completely different styles for completely different drinking opportunities, I think.
I'll lead you.
I love that description of like the difference in the way that it's made, because again, I think you can think of rosés as kind of falling into either kind of being made more like white wines or being made more like red wines, because of course rosés are made from red grapes. But if you press a red grape when it first comes into the cellar, you get minimal character from the skins. And this is essentially a white wine style rosé made from red grapes, whereas the dianthus, which has enough time on the skins, is from a little bit riper fruit. That tends to be a little more of a red wine style. So I get the useful way of thinking about it.
I think it's important for people to understand a little bit that one of the biggest stressful moments of our rosé world is when we're starting to get ready to bottle the Patelin. Is it pink enough? Because we press it so cold and so early that it's very much a white wine, and Grenache doesn't have a lot of color in the skins anyway. So there's always the question every year of let's sit down and look at it. And is it pink enough for everybody? And it always is. It always works out, but it's always a point before we go and bottle. We've all got to agree that this is where we want it.
That's always a text that I get from Neil every year, like right before bottling. Like, are you sure that this is pink enough?
We're not going to bottle it and then have Jason say, "Oh, it's not quite pink enough for me."
It's interesting. It has never really been an issue with the bottles, but it was an issue with the wine that we did, the rosé that we put in keg, where people don't have the bottle, because the bottle, like you have enough of it that what color you get is concentrated by the volume that's in the bottle. But when all you have is a glass, and generally people are ordering the wine on tap at restaurants and wine bars, just getting a glass, like if they look at it and they're like, this looks like a white wine, and then we get complaints from the wine bar owners, or rather we get complaints from the distributors who get complaints from the wine bar owners. So there was one year where we maybe went a little bit too light, but the idea of this Patelin Rosé is that it is quite pale and quite white wine style and very fresh.
I think the public's perception has grown too since those earlier days, where now people are way more willing to accept a more pale pink rosé than they were back then, particularly from us. I mean, our Dianthus has always been known to be such a dark rosé in certain vintages, less so these days. But in general, you go out there and look on the market, and a lot of the Provençal rosés are very, very pale, and people are a bit more accustomed to that now than they used to be.
I think they're definitely accustomed to it, because a lot of people, they got a box of this rosé that they had in their fridge. So same as the keg, they're not seeing it concentrated in a bottle. They're just seeing it glass by glass.
Okay, we've gotten 3 questions about the rosé in a box.
Yeah, we couldn't get away from this one, could we?
can scroll through the questions. They're all essentially the same question. So those of you who were aware of this, last summer I did a carbon footprint self-analysis of our work here at Tablas Creek. And one of the things that it drove home to me is that the packaging is so important. The glass bottle accounts for more than half the carbon footprint of the average California winery. And so anything that you can do to improve the footprint of your bottle is going to have really big impacts on overall your business. So we've lightened our bottles. We've used lightweight bottles since 2010-ish, 2009-ish. And that has a good impact. That reduces the carbon footprint by about 10%. But by far the best package in terms of the footprint is that 3-liter bag-in-box. And it has a stigma of being kind of like grocery store generic. But that's not really because it's bad for the wine inside. In fact, it can be really good for the wine inside, because once you open it, the bag that's in the box deflates as you remove the wine out of it, and it never comes into contact with oxygen. So you can have it in your fridge for 2 months and it will still be just as good as it was the day that you opened it. So we figured, maybe we're the right winery to try to take a bite at that stigma. So we decided to divert 100 cases roughly of our Patelin Rosé from bottles into boxes. We boxed up 324 boxes, I think, in the first round, thinking that like this would be a way to dip our toe in the water, and like maybe it would sell out in a month and we'd have a good reason to investigate it further. We announced its release and it sold out in 4 hours, and then spent the next month fielding calls from disappointed fans, hoping to get some. So we did put some more into box. We're waiting to release that until May. So there will be another release of it. If it is something that you are interested in, please shoot us an email. We're keeping essentially a wish list of people who asked for the first round and didn't get it, which is already like 100 and some odd people long. So the second batch we made a little more. How much did we make, Chelsea? 400 and something cases?
475.
475 boxes. So we'll have a little bit more, but we're going to offer it first to the people who have reached out to us to say that they were disappointed that they missed the first round. So yeah. Yes. So Ian just posted in there, email wineclub@tablascreek.com. So yeah, if you let us know, you'll be one of the people who will get that first offer before we put it as a general release. Because I'm sure if we did a general release, we would just have a repeat of the same thing where it would be gone in 6 hours, and then we would have other people who are disappointed they didn't get it. So let us know first, and we'll do our best to get it out to you. Okay. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about this most recent winter. So it was sort of a whiplash winter. So This picture that Ian just put up is from December. We had the wettest December that we've had since 2005. And we were set up at that point at the end of December. We'd had like almost 200% of our normal winter rainfall to date. We were halfway to what we normally get for a full winter, and we were expecting things to be really wonderful. And it stopped raining at the end of December and did not rain again until we got a storm in the end of March, like 10 days ago, of 1.5 inches. So where we are now is kind of dry, but not critically dry. We've gotten about 18 inches of rain. That's like roughly 3/4 of what we normally expect. So it's not terrible, but it's not the year that it looked like it was shaping up to be. And now that it has heated up, it's been 90 degrees here the last few days. I'm really wishing I didn't have these lamps shining on me at the moment. But it seems crazy, but in a couple of days, it's supposed to drop down, and we're supposed to have 4 nights in a row of frost risk. So welcome to April in Paso Robles. But so Neil, how would you describe the winter and kind of where we are now? Like what's going on in the vineyard now, what things look like going forwards?
So it was super encouraging to get those early rains, and I forget exactly when they were. You probably remember, but we got a great rain in the latter part of last year, which we thought was an indicator of, it's going to be a 40-inch year, and got overly optimistic, perhaps. Great to have that 1.5 inches 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago. 18 inches is a decent amount. I mean, it's just bizarre to look at that picture that was just up and to know that yesterday I drove across that lake bed on a little vehicle. That water is gone. There's still water birds down there looking for it, but it's gone. So not as much as we'd like, of course. As we move deeper into the winter, the big fear is frost. We address everything year to year with what we're given. So being that we got so little water, the cover crops will be mowed and tilled in sooner, and areas where we do have some irrigation will probably have to be supplemented later in the year. But, again, the biggest thing for us at this point is we haven't had much rain, so we're probably not going to see a bumper harvest, even if everything goes to the best. So right now, frost would be bad. It's not the most devastating time because the lower lying areas where the worst frost will happen is a lot of it isn't fully out or isn't out at all. So looking on the bright side, there is that. If it happens in 3 weeks, it's really devastating. But in general, I don't think we're in a position to complain. At almost 20 inches of rain this year, it works for us, and the way we've spaced the vineyard, the dry farm stuff being wide spaced, I think it'll weather it just fine. Again, everyone's trying to make predictions on weather. It's so dependent on, if we have a super mild year, then yeah, it'll be great. If it gets really, really hot and stays really, really hot, we're gonna wish that we had more rain. Weather is so fluctuant, and there's so much predicting and people wanting and wishing, and you can never tell what's coming. Next week could be a devastating week for us, or it could be nothing, and we move on, and it's a mild year, and everything will be fine. But weather runs our show, and it took me a long time to realize that there's not much point in stressing out about that one. You just work with it and do what you can to work the best you can with Mother Nature on that one.
I think Ian has a picture of where we are in bud break, because I think that would be fun for people to see. This is a time of year where you can see really dramatic differences from like the tops of the hills to the bottoms of the hills, and from the early varieties to the late varieties. So these are all pictures that I took earlier this week. In the upper left-hand corner is Viognier. Up at the top of the vineyard, in the upper right-hand corner is Grenache, also at the top of the vineyard. The bottom left is Roussanne, which looks like it could still be February. And the bottom right is Counoise, which is, you can see little buds sprouting, but it's still way, way farther away than the things at the top. And this is this is the story of what things look like in the vineyard right now. So it's dramatically different depending on where you are.
So not concerned about the bottom two, but we're concerned about the upper two. But fortunately, they're more at the top, though the Viognier is like that most of the way down the hill now. So, and frost is weird; it can pinch you at the top of the hill too. But it is a point of the diversity of not only Tablas Creek itself, but the area, that the bud break is so varied throughout our vineyard and throughout the appellation itself. You know, we buy from vineyards that even a few miles from each other, even a couple of miles from each other. One is 4 inches of growth right now, same varietal. Somewhere else, there's no growth. You know, there's people we buy from that aren't worried about frost at all because they're a little higher elevation. You know, I think it's part of the beauty of our appellation that this diversity shows even with the bud break.
I want to quickly run through a few of the questions. We got some questions about the rosé. So the question from George asking why we delay the release of the box wine. The challenge is that this was new for our shipping warehouse, and we weren't satisfied with the way that a lot of the boxes arrived to the people who ordered them. So we've been doing some trials with them, shipping sample boxes around the country with new boxes that we hope, like the exterior boxes and the padding, that we hope will allow the wines in box to show up in better condition. We don't really want to have a repeat of what we did last time. So that's why we haven't released it yet. We weren't happy with the shipping piece of it. We've gotten several requests for the 90-pound guard puppies. Those are coming. Be patient. Stick with us. The question about what about cans? So Marcia asked, so cool about the box rosé, but what about cans? So we have looked at that a couple of times. Cans tend to change the chemistry of the wine inside a little more. Bottles are totally inert. They don't change it at all. The bag and the box is closer to inert. Cans are more of an issue. So it's something that we've looked at but haven't been comfortable jumping in yet. So
it's a usage thing. It's a usage thing too. You know, why do we want a can for Tablas Creek? I mean, it's pretty clear why we want a box of rosé. It's in your fridge, and there it is. Cans are more interesting of what you're going to do with them. Why do we want a can? It's a different packaging for sure. And it's a good choice. I don't think it's a bad choice by any stretch of the imagination. But, you know, with everything these days too, I mean, the availability of product is hard, just like every other industry for us.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. And then a question about how the fires impacted 2020 and 2021. And are we prepping for fires in 2022? So the good news is there were no issues with fires in 2021. 2020, there were fires all over California. Luckily, the nearest ones were like 75 miles to the north of us, but there were days where there was a ton of smoke in the atmosphere. We were fortunate that by and large, the fires were far enough away that a lot of the volatile compounds had volatilized off by the time the actual smoke particles got to us. We've been tasting carefully all of the wines, trying to identify any characteristics, and have happily not found any to this point. We did send a bunch of samples off at the time of harvest, and everything came back negative to any of the smoke compounds. So we're certainly worried about it and nervous about it and checking it. In terms of what we're doing, prepping for fires in 2022, there is only a certain amount that you can do. But one of the things that we are doing is grazing our flock of sheep in the oak forests on our property and on our neighboring properties to help chew down that fire load, kind of the shrubs and dead leaves and dry grasses that are tinder for these wildfires. So one of the cool things that Dane, our shepherd, mentioned when I was out on a tour with him was that hundreds of years ago, there would have been giant herds of elk that would have been wandering these forests and keeping them clean. That would have been turning all of that kind of brushy stuff into food for the elk, and then into manure that helps nourish the trees. And we are replicating that with the sheep. So we're hoping that we're going to be at least somewhat more protected than we would otherwise have been, but it is always a concern. And we've been lucky that there have not been a big fire nearby, but it feels like it's only a matter of time.
We have 2 people up at a seminar at UC Davis today at a smoke taint and how to deal with that if you do run across it. And I agree with Jason. The work we're doing in the forest around the property is really, really important. Not just the sheep, but manually removing a lot of dead wood that's been there for generations and cleaning that up. And that's really important to us. But that's more of a protection for us because the smoke can come from a ways and still damage the fruit. So it's something we all have to think about. And within our industry, it's the fact that there's a seminar stay at Davis is indicative that it's a huge issue for us. And I don't think any of us are under the illusion that it's going away anytime soon. Again, we only had 18 inches of rain this year. And we're certainly a very wet part of this appellation and a pretty wet part of the state as far as wine growing goes.
I feel like in a lot of ways, the weather, like the amount of rain you get, is kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like you get a lot of rain, great. That has a lot of extra growth of the grasses and the shrubs, which is once it dries out in September and October, it's just more fuel for the fires. It's so I think what you're talking about, the maintenance of those forests it's one of the things that we have at least some control over.
If there's any good that comes of what's happened in the last few years, it's that we're paying a lot more attention, as are a lot of other people, to better maintenance and paying better attention to the woodlands that are around us and looking after that land that we previously just didn't think about because it wasn't what we were farming. But having that be healthy is really important to everything. So being pushed in that direction, in my opinion, has been a good thing. Not how we got there, but the fact that we're now focused on it is really, really good.
Okay, let's jump into the first red. So the first red in the sequence is our 2019 Tannat. Again, I feel like it should have more explanatory text on that slide. So Neil, you want to tell the story of why the heck we make Tannat?
Couldn't have much less on that. To the point, as Tannat should be. I mean, how deep do we go? I mean, why do we have Tannat? I guess would be the first question. It's got nothing to do with Rhone varietals. And I mean, there's a long version, but I'll go with the short one today. Tannat sort of showed up through quarantine in the nurseries in Cornell by surprise to Jason's father and the Prem brothers. Why is that there? We didn't ship that, etc. As it turned out, the nurseryman who did the submission of our selections to the University in Cornell, Didier Gilibert, also owned a nursery in Uruguay, and he did his own research on what he thought would work in Paso Robles. Why not? And he decided that he thought Tannat and Vermentino would both be good fits in this area. So he just kind of sent them on in with all the Rhones that the two families had chosen to send. And at first, we kind of pushed them to the back and didn't think about them. They were out. We planted them. We had small propagation blocks. I think the original block of Tannat is like a third of an acre. But then we really did start to realize that both these varieties not only grow really well here, but they show really well. I think this Tannat in particular, for me, is one of the best ones I've ever tasted off this property. It's super juicy and pretty, if you can ever call Tannat pretty. But anyway, I guess it was a mistake. Thanks, Gilibert, for sending them in here. And now there's a lot of people in Paso Robles and probably around the state planting Tannat and Vermentino even more so. That's starting to make a bigger and bigger push. I could list a few people that have got that in the ground now. And both of them just flourish here. They don't mind the heat. They don't seem to suffer too terribly from the frost. They like the warm weather. The Tannat is not the aggressive tannic wine that it's known in its home country in the Mataran and also in Uruguay. And Vermentino is just, well, it's just beautiful. I mean, great acidity and pretty and the biggest canopy in the vineyard. So Didier didn't get it wrong, just kind of a strange way to go about it, I guess.
I have this vivid memory of my dad calling the research station at Cornell in upstate New York, I was only hearing half the conversation. I was home from college, I think, when this happened. And he called the station to tell them that they'd gotten something mixed up and were charging us for somebody else's grapes. Like that we were getting the bill for the virus testing of Tannat and Vermentino, and those were definitely not our grapes because we hadn't ordered them from France. And I guess the guy on the other side of the line was like, I don't know what to tell you. They came with the others. They're yours. And after that, my dad called the pairings and asked them if they had sent them, and they said, of course not. Why would we have sent you those grape varieties? We don't grow those grape varieties. It took months to clear up where they'd come from and why.
In his defense, can you imagine going to your dad and Jean-Pierre Perrin and suggesting that we bring in Tannat and Vermentino? It would have been a flat no. Like, you're a fool. That's ridiculous. So
this is a classic case of like ask for forgiveness.
Exactly. And cheers, Didier, for that one, because I think it's been a good value to the Paso Robles appellation for sure.
Okay, Chelsea, can you talk about how we make this Tannat and what you look for? What you think people should look for as they're tasting it?
Tannat is one of those funny grape varieties. I mean, he totally nailed it with, the appropriateness for growing in Paso Robles. Tannat is one of those like absolute war tank varieties out in the vineyard where we brought pretty much everything else in during harvest. And then by the time harvest is starting to wind down, like, Tannat. And you go out and check numbers on Tannat, and they are textbook. Like, it's always just out there in the vineyard, just powering through when everything else is kind of struggling maybe. And you bring Tannat in, it just ferments so easily and so well. You taste it, during fermentation, and it's really, really cool. It's very tannic. And then we sit down at the blending table and you're like, this is fantastic. I can't believe this isn't one of the big varieties that is so well known in California. And it is kind of a nice wine for us to kind of bridge that gap for people that are more accustomed to really intense, really tannic and structured varieties. This has a little bit of everything. This is kind of something for everybody in that glass. And, we always kind of joke that, you've got a lot of like dry aged ribeye, and it's kind of got that like iron bloodiness, and it's got a little bit of that, like campfire, and you have a little bit of like sweet cream butter, and you've got a little violets, and it's just like basically it looks like somebody just took like the flavor and aroma wheel and just spun it like The Price is Right, and it's just everything going round and round. But it arrives in this like beautiful package, and so many people talk about Tannat from Uruguay where they're just so intense, and when they're young they're almost undrinkable. They need to wait 10 years or more so everything can kind of calm down and figure itself out. And I feel like our Tannat, I mean, I'll definitely be drinking this with my husband tonight. This is a beautiful, beautiful wine. I love this.
You gonna open a real bottle, or are you just gonna drink the 187?
I don't need to answer that. I'm a grown-up. I can do what I want.
Too late for that.
But this, this vintage, it's interesting because you do get so much of that beautiful. I get a little bit of that cedar plank character on the front end, and kind of that fresh raspberry coulis, and then on the palate, it is just so much fresh fruit. It is just like an absolute bouquet. It's almost explosive on the palate, which is so fun. It's just like, biting right into just a summer ripe blackberry where it's just that explosion of juice. This is, I tasted this afternoon in preparation for this, and it's just like, man, this is so fun to drink.
It's always been kind of a thing that struck me with Tannat is you smell it, and it's got stuff going on, but it's almost a bit intimidating. You're a bit frightened. It's going to be burly and closed. But then on the palate, it always, as you said, it explodes in all these great juicy fruits, and it's super cool. always surprises me still today when we poured that. I said, wow, this is so vibrant.
It is.
And
It's-
this vintage, I think, is particularly so. There are some vintages where like it feels like it's on the edge of too much. And this vintage, it feels like all of its pieces are together, even at this relatively young age. It has really nice acidity. A lot of red wines, a lot of tannic red wines are low in acid. Tannat is not. Tannat's got good acids that helps balance the richness of the tannins. It's also got tons of fruit. It's got lots of that spice. It doesn't feel heavy or like ponderous at all. I think this is the best Tannat we've ever made for my taste. It's 2019. Question of how long it would last to find its peak. This is one of the wines that we very often taste at our 10-year retrospective and say, not still young. Tannat and Syrah are the two that we're often tasting and thinking, something more than 10 years is easy for it. But it's so balanced right now that, again, I don't feel like you need to wait on it. You just need to maybe pair it with something fairly substantial as far as food goes. But I would think anytime in the next 20 years, you're going to be pretty safe.
And really, the dish of its home is the cassoulet, right? So it's hard to think of anything better than that with this wine.
Okay, I feel like we have been deferring people's requests to see the sheep and the puppies long enough. I think we're
We're just not good enough.
5 requests for puppies. So we are up to a little quick flock update. We are up to
Flock update.
a flock update. Yes, we are up to 350 sheep. We had an incredibly fertile winter. We have almost 200 lambs in the vineyard. So really big flock, by far the most we've ever had at any time of year. We have just moved them out of the vineyard because of bud break. You can't have them out there, even in the Roussanne, which is the last thing to sprout. They're still the vines that are starting to sprout, and they'll start to do some damage. So we moved them out about a week ago. And they will spend the next 6 months until we pick in the unplanted grassy areas and in the forests. Yes, that is a ton of lambs. Thanks, Sarah.
So I would just like to interject because Dane, our shepherd, came into the cellar last week before he moved the sheep, asking if we could be like human curtains to keep them out of the vineyard, to direct them where they needed to go. And there was a moment where you're standing there just yelling, hey, sheep, as the herd comes thundering by. And it's kind of like a comet's tail because it's all of, the larger, more mature sheep up front. And then at the tail end, it's all the little babies just kind of like trotting along behind their moms. And we were standing out there and I turned to Amanda and was like, what is this job?
Excellent. So as several people have requested, because of the size of the flock, we decided to double our guardian dog protectors. So we, in addition to Bjorn and Adelita, who are in the foreground of this picture, they're the protectors that we got, 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah.
We got 2.
How annoyed Bjorn looks. God.
Yeah, he's over the puppies.
He is so over them.
He's also, he's normally looks sleek and amazing. He looks like a lion, and he's molting right now. He's losing his winter coat, so he also looks kind of like scruffy, and I'm sure he's not pleased by that either. But the 2 new puppies that we got last fall, which we have named Osa and Tito, are now 8 months old, 90 pounds, and they have graduated from being things that we need to kind of take care of separately to new protectors for the flock. So now if you walk up, they'll be the ones who'll be running towards you and barking and making sure that you are benign. And this will allow us to split the flock, which is something that's going to be very useful because even after we've cut it down for summer, it's still a lot of sheep, and it's really nice to be able to deploy them not 300 strong, but instead in smaller groups, and yet you need guardians with each one, and they can learn from the senior dogs. Bill says, please get some goats. We are not going to get some goats. no matter how many times people ask. No, the goats, unlike sheep, who ignore the vines as long as they're dormant, goats kind of eat everything. They're super destructive, and we had a couple for a little while, and they were also mean to the sheep, which is you don't think of this happening, but it was like they would like randomly just sort of turn and butt the sheep, and the sheep were starting to get very anxious. So I don't think that we won't be adding goats to the flock. The sheep are plenty enough for us to worry about. So the sheep, though they are cute, and though the puppies are cute, that's not the point. The point is that this is a really critical piece of our farming protocol, and specifically our regenerative farming protocol. So we have been, for the last couple of years, one of we were the first winery in California to get the regenerative organic certification. We recently got news that we are the first vineyard in the world to get the gold level regenerative organic certification, which is so exciting. We're one of the only farms in the world to have the gold level certification. So when they sent this to us, they said, the executive director of the Regenerative Organic Alliance sent it to us and said, essentially, like, don't get too comfortable, because this is a really hard certification to maintain. So good job getting it, but don't assume that you'll qualify for it next year, which I thought kind of set an expectation. But the whole idea of regenerative organic is that we have committed to using our farm to have a positive impact on our people and on our community and on our environment. So when people ask you what the significance is of regenerative organic, Neil, how do you answer that?
Wow. I think the significance of it is, I mean, it's such an all-encompassing certification. I mean, so beyond, I think organic is a great certification, and it's important. I think Demeter is important for the biodynamic side of things. But the fact that the regenerative encompasses not only the farming practices, which is important, but also the welfare of any animals that we have on the property, and as importantly, or maybe more importantly, the people on the property too. And that was one of the big pushes to get the gold was the people element of that, and how we pay them and how we look after them. And yes, it was hard, and credit to the Tablas Creek company and the philosophy that's within this company, that it is important enough to us. The people that work here are important enough to us to go the extra mile to get that gold. And she's wrong. We'll continue to push and get the gold. I mean, it's what we do. I think it's hugely important. I think it's really important that Tablas Creek is at the fore of it. I think that we're just very, very small in the big scheme of things. I think it's our responsibility to stand up and make some noise about it so the bigger farms go in that direction. And that is happening. I mean, we're seeing the likes of Fetzer and big groups taking this stance. And it's too hard to do it just for publicity and for sales. You have to believe that this is the way the farming needs to be in the future, I believe, to make it work. I mean, it's too complicated. There's too much work achieving it. There's too much expense involved in it. There's too much paperwork involved in it just to do it because you think it's cool on the bottle. I mean, organic was hard enough. This is a whole nother level. And I'm incredibly proud of our team to have achieved it, and incredibly proud to be a part of a company that supported that goal all the way to the gold standard of it, which even the ROC themselves were telling us was unattainable. But we did it. And the point is not that we get sit here and brag about it. The point is that this is where the future of farming should be as much as possible. And if it can start with us, who, yeah, we're a little privileged farmers because we make wine, but if we can start the charge, and it doesn't need to be gold, if just a vegetable farmer who's not got the soapbox that we have as a winery goes to a bronze or silver regenerative, that's better for the world and all of us that live in it. So the significance is huge. I mean, it's immeasurable in my opinion.
And that's one of the things I think is important, is that even the bronze is a heavy lift. I mean,
God, yeah.
the bar is really high for even the most basic level of the regenerative organic certification, which is one of the things that really appealed to us about it, because there are plenty of sustainability certifications that you can find on the backs of bottles, and you can find wineries really proud of doing, where the bar's not that high. And it's great that people are on that road. I don't want to dismiss anybody's efforts. Everybody I know who has worked towards any sort of sustainability certification is doing it out of good motives and has made real improvements to what they're doing. But the fact that the bar was set as high as it was one of the things that drew us to it, because we felt like it really was the gold standard for what great farming would become.
I think maintaining that is the challenge of the future, is maintaining the integrity of that certification and being really rigorous on how they visit their criteria is followed, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's important.
I think we have a picture of the Dianthus bottle, which is one of the first bottles that has, along with the Vermentino, the first to have that regenerative organic certified seal.
How cool is that to see? Huh? That's a
Pretty
lot
great.
of work went into that little logo.
Well, we didn't know that was being put on the label, and when we started running those bottles, when it was on the line, like ran out of the room where the labels were being stored. Like, you guys, have you seen this?
I'm afraid that's on me. I probably it means that I didn't really disseminate that information terribly properly.
Yeah, my fault too. I knew it was going on there.
It was a great surprise. So,
well, Chelsea, it's on the box coming soon. So I think that's an important. I don't know if now is the time. I mean, talk about the new actual case box, which is going to have this stamp on it, and where we went with that, because I think that's another really huge step for us that people are going to see.
Well, with this step of getting ROC certified, everybody in their respective departments has basically done a top to bottom audit of their processes and what they're buying for their respective departments, and how they're buying and why they're buying. And one of the things that we looked at, for all of our packaging that we purchase for, everything at Tablas Creek, Jason already talked about the carbon footprint of, the savings that we got with the box wine. One of the things that we were looking at is the case boxes that our bottles are stored in. They do take a lot of energy to produce. And one of the things, we had a meeting with our corrugated company, and you can get basically forest certified cardboard. So it only comes from specific forests that are organically grown or carefully grown. So they have to be actually gone out to be certified for this process. So we're buying only from forests that are grown responsibly. The next thing we decided to do was go with craft.
Grown and harvested, right? I mean,
yes, grown and harvested and produced. So we decided, instead of the flood printing, because our cases right now are that beautiful like satin cream color, but with that flood printing, you are using a lot of ink, there's a lot of waste product that goes in with that. And so we decided, instead, we're just going to go with the natural corrugated craft brown color. And with our estate wines, it's going to be the same, the leaf logo on the side. And then on the back end, on the bottom, we do get to put the ROC logo. And with that, we have the text, the world's first regenerative organic certified winery, which is like really, really neat. And one of the mantras that our old shepherd always had was be the first. And that was always kind of his like driving force, and, being excited to go out there and, don't be afraid to be the first. And I'm so proud of the work that Tablas Creek has put in to being the first on a lot of these really, really important points. It's so cool. It's such an honor to work for a company like that.
One last thing, and I know we need to get tasting the next wine, because Jeff has a pairing for us for the next wine, and I see him moving around the kitchen. I know he's ready to bring it to us. But if you can put that picture back up, Ian, with the 2021. So this is going on our wines, starting with the 2021 vintage of our estate wines. So you'll see it as we bottle the other 2021 whites later this year and the 2021 reds next year. So you'll see it rolled out little by little. It will not be on the Patelin wines. The Patelin wines are not regenerative organic certified. So that'll be another point of distinction between our estate wines and the Patelin wines. One question from Chris about the ingredient label. So it turns out that's a problem. This is the first wines that we put the ingredients label on, and it got through the regenerative organic certified folks the first time, and the second time they rejected it, saying that it was not going to follow the TTB alcohol guidelines. So I don't know. We are continuing to figure this out. Again, being the first has some consequences in dealing with some government bureaucracy and figuring out what the right way is that they want to do things. So I do think that having ingredient listings is the future. I think people want to know what's in the wines. We want to share what's in the wines, but it's not currently the way that most wines are labeled, and it adds to some labeling challenges. So yes, so Chris says, doesn't Ridge do that too? That's one of the ones that we looked at as an example. But it's the complication. They don't also have an organic certification, and having organic certified grapes in an ingredients label is apparently not something which is allowed by the TTB at the moment. So anyway, we're going to continue to work towards that, work towards transparency as much as we possibly can, because I think it's important and just the right thing to do. But we will have the regenerative organic certified logo. I'm not promising we will have the ingredients label on the rest of the wines that you see, because the labels that we just were going back and forth with the ROA on this week, they told us we couldn't do it. So, okay, let's do the next wine, which is the Le Complice 2019. So all three of these reds are 2019 vintage, which I think is great, because again, this is a vintage which has a very well-defined character. The Complice is our newest blend, and one of the things that I think is cool is this was sort of the last wine that I feel like my dad had his fingerprints on us making. So you remember sitting around the table in my dad's office as we sort of came up with this idea, right, Neil?
Yeah, no, I mean, his fingerprints are all over this for sure. So Terry Noir really is where we have to go for the origin of this wine. And well, the first years we made it, it's such a bizarre grape. It came in and we had no idea what it was. We asked the friends what it was, and they didn't really know what it was, because they haven't really made it as a single for ever. Maybe it always goes into co-ferment. So when we first made it, it's a very pale, some of you have had it, I'm sure, but it's a very pale red wine. It's, as we say, it's not noir, that's for sure, but it's pale. However, it's incredibly structured. So it can look like a rosé, but it has a structure of a real red wine. And just was super cool and interesting. And Bob, some sitting around a table tasting during our blending, said that he thought it would be cool to build a wine around the Terry Noir and to have another blend. And so that's where it started, was how do we do that? So scratching head, and Chelsea and I and the cellar team and Jason, all of us just, okay, let's think about this. And also to add another blend to our stable, and have it be distinctive. So it grew from there, and it was, I think, 3 or 4 new clones of Syrah that we did a much more whole cluster and stem included production ferment with. So they had more of the savoriness than we see in other things. And then Grenache came in to keep everything in balance, is really how I see that. And the remarkable thing about this wine is, to me, that you look at that Terry Noir in the glass and you taste that Terry Noir, and it doesn't feel overly dramatic. But you can taste in the 6%, it is a real component of this wine. And the others, bring it into balance, but it does not pale to the side next to that Syrah, which is a pretty burly Syrah. So there was that, and then Bob came up with the name too, which is the Accomplice, which he's calling the Terry Noir the Accomplice, which is a great name. I wouldn't say that about every name that Bob came up with, but this one, it really works with what we're doing.
So how would you? So Neil mentioned stem inclusion. So Chelsea, how would you describe what the impact is of using stems in wine? It's a question that we get a lot.
So with the stems, I mean, Syrah carries it so nicely. We do a little bit on the Pinot Noir from Bob's vineyard, which is now Jason's home vineyard. And it basically lends this beautiful, like, spiciness.
Can't help it, Chelsea. Oh, look at, oh, where is it? Look at that.
It's kind of nasty of you, Neil.
Just sharing, Chelsea, sharing.
Those stems do lend this beautiful spicy bite to the wine, this really great structure. So with something like Syrah that tends to come in a little bit earlier, the stems will kind of raise that pH a little bit, so kind of fleshes out that palate in one dimension, but then also lend kind of this like brambly, spiky structure on the outside of it. So it's both making it a little bit softer and more approachable while also making it a little bit more kind of hard-edged and intense. With the Syrah that we use for the lots in Le Complice, you do get a little bit of that crunchy green spiciness. And one of the things with the Terry Noir is it does have that really dry, grippy tannin, but on the palate, the front palate, it's like dried rose petals and super delicate. And then it just like has these claws that sink in on the finish. Like the tannins are just like, they're shocking, especially after just looking at it, which is so pale in color and almost kind of like a dark rosé. And one of the things that, Bob was talking about was, Syrah can be so opaque and it can be so kind of this like brick wall of a variety in its youth, especially where it's like you can't really see into the soul of Syrah because it doesn't give anything up. And so if you had a way to kind of unknit the fibers of Syrah a little bit to just kind of make it a little bit more approachable. And so the idea was that, you can kind of loosen that Syrah a little bit while still maintaining that grip and the intensity on the finish with that tannin. And then, like Neil said, the Grenache is basically just to kind of make a nice, juicy, chewy mid palate, so it's not so like intense and terrifying. And this has become one of my favorite wines. So we do use the stem inclusion. So it's a mix of whole cluster, which means the whole clusters just go into open top fermenters, and we'll have interns running around and stomping the grapes with their feet as it's being dumped in there. We do a little bit of stem inclusion. So that means that we will destem the grapes and then add stems back in so that we have the ability to kind of fine tune exactly how much stem inclusion we want in there. And with a lot of these lots, they do get foot stomped because you don't have the ability to basically punch down or pump over when those grapes are put in there initially before that fermentation starts breaking skins and giving you juice. So these are a lot of those lots that get a lot of hands-on attention and a lot of cardio work for our interns. And then typically during aging, they will go into our concrete eggs. So you get a little bit more of that, again, kind of that softness from the concrete.
And that was a concept from early on, was that this would be a wine that ended up aging in concrete, just to give it another element separate from the other things we did. Just a footnote to this, I'll never forget when we first sat down and tasted the Syrah with the stem inclusion with Jason's dad and Jason's brother when they were young, and they both tasted it. It was like, no, this won't ever work. And it's like, no, you have to understand this takes time to age, and we've got to let this integrate. And it was so upfront when we first tasted with them. They were pretty shocked, but as it has time and it ages out and it goes this beautiful spicy character, it's such a cool process.
And I do think it's worth noting, this was one of my favorites when I tasted it earlier in the lineup today as well. And the fact that this is something that has kind of that cool green mintiness and spiciness, and it's being tasted after the Tannat, which is just like this behemoth of a wine, the fact that it's holding up so beautifully and is like so distinctively itself, I think is definitely worth noting. This is an incredible vintage of the Le Complice.
I mean, obviously, there's not a single bottling of Tablas Creek that you can drink without thinking of Bob particularly, but this one for me will always be the one that I'll never be able to open this bottle without just thinking of the fist on the table, the we're gonna do this, and us all going, I'm not sure it's such a good idea, and saying no, we're gonna go down, we're gonna do it, and we did it, and here it is, and it's now also one of my favorites, and I'll always love that about this wine.
Okay. Let's use Bev's question as a great segue. I know Jeff has some thoughts about how to pair with the Le Complice and this delicious little bit of filet that he brought to Neil that Neil was showing you. So, Jeff,
It is good too, Chelsea.
Neil, I'm trying to get a glass of wine out of you.
Get out of there.
Can I open that? No? That's a no?
I'm not sure why you're even allowed in that room, frankly.
The idea of our pairings for this spring was kind of a chilled spring surf and turf is what I came up with, and using the classic flavors of the salmon and then the petite filet as well. And so this is a miso charged shoulder filet, and it is a little known cut of beef. I've done it on other recipes with us before. I use it quite often because it's beautifully marbled, textured, and flavorful. And when you do a miso marinade on it, it creates an umami experience with a little bit of sweetness to it, a hint of spice. And so we cooked it over good old Paso Robles oak, seared it just till it's rare, and then chill it in the refrigerator, leave it overnight, then slice it. And we served it with some great fleur de sel, a Pomeranian mustard aioli, and a little bit of chervil over the top. It's quite simple as a dish, but I think it's powerful as a pairing. And I think that in some arenas, it's difficult to pair chilled foods to red wines. This has such an umami experience that I really liked it with Le Complice, to tell you the truth. The density and the complexity of the wine, and the kind of refreshing but still earthy umami quality of the beef was really fun. And I think it was fun to do this chilled surf and turf. I also wanted to kind of mention that the last couple of virtual pairings that we did without in-person a party, and so I did a little bit more plate style and a little bit more complex. If everybody who wasn't here with us can keep in mind that this is designed to be on a plate together, one next to the other in hors d'oeuvre style, just a couple bites. And so when you do that, you really have to intensify the flavors, because you only have one bite to change people's mind. And I'm excited about the red wine pairings with the chilled beef. What do you guys think?
So
I think it's great. It works. What cut of beef is it? Did you mention that?
Yeah, so the cut of beef is what's called there are three different names for it. Everybody's trying to market it differently. What it really is tres mejores. And so a tres mejores is a section of three muscles that are in the shoulder, and there's only two per animal. And it's about the size of a pork tenderloin. Became popular with the butchers, with people who are cutting it, because nobody knew how to market it. It then became known as a shoulder fillet, is how I'm marketing it right now, or menuing it. And some people call it a Baja cut. But it is flavorful, really flavorful, like a hanger steak, but tender like a fillet, and very versatile. And it's one of those cuts of beef that you should seek out if you can find it. Specialty markets will be able to have it. And it's not as expensive as a ribeye, but it's satisfying as well. And so I really enjoy using it a lot.
I don't think it would be inappropriate, Jeff, if you spoke about how your day started today.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Segue into my day.
Okay. Yeah, I think you should. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that everybody knows, I'm probably the busiest and most excited chef in Paso Robles, because we've opened a new kitchen spot. While we're continuing to do a catering and working with Tablas Creek and other wineries, Neil and I have opened a spot called Kitchen 46 on Vineyard. and 46. And it's been months of getting things together and everything, getting things in line. And you can only imagine contractors and things like that. While my staff has been creatively chomping at the bit, everybody's like, we can't wait to get this open, because the kitchen isn't like a usual kitchen. Everybody's ideas are welcome. It's going to be a creative lab. It's going to be a place where you can find fresh pastas, where you can find biodynamic products like incredible Tablas Creek lamb served in several different dishes. People's ideas coming together, sustainable seafood. And so it is called Kitchen 46. And today it was approved by the county, and we were opened at 9:30 this morning without a hitch. And
for the record, I have nothing to do with Kitchen 46. I'm just lurking around there.
Well, that was the whole thing, is that we
Unless you're going to start giving me money, that would be nice.
I mean, we did have to call the authorities because we saw somebody just kind of vagrant around the property, and it ended up being Neil. So and we're just
It's a mistake we make all the time.
So, yeah, we couldn't be more excited. And obviously, we're introducing dishes that are wine friendly. And I was thinking, as Jason was talking about spice and Roussanne today, that we're doing this weekend, we're doing a scallop dish with a green apple and fermented mango curry. And I thought, what a great pairing that would be with the Roussanne.
When will people be able to enjoy your food at that location?
At the location, Kitchen 46, obviously partnered with Le Madrone as well. And we will be offering lunches every Saturday and Sunday from 11 to 3, and upcoming extended hours. But right now, we really want to nail it on our weekend lunches, and bringing in a great staff to do it. And I'll have to say that in my years here at Tablas Creek, there have been a lot of really great moments. Tablas Creek was my first client in Paso Robles. I decided to open a catering company, and Tablas was my first client, and I think that was 17 years ago. Wow. I don't know how you stood up with me or had me for so many years. Yeah. And
there's just nobody else.
Nobody
else is the problem.
The problem is that there's no.
We've tried.
And
okay, wait. I want to lob in a couple of the questions that people have sent. So Brian asked, what would you substitute for Pommery mustard? Would whole grain mustard work?
Whole grain mustard is great. Pommery mustard, I like to use it because it has a little bit more bite to it. And just regular whole grain mustard is great. I would suggest just a hint. I mean, just a hint of fresh horseradish in there, and that'll help give that bite that Pommery mustard does.
Cool. And Matt asked a question. Maybe we can send the food pairing recipe with the tastings for the next virtual. So we did send out the links to the food pairing recipes in the last email that we sent out to Wine Club members.
Ian just put them up.
And then Ian has also put them in the comments. If you missed them, they're also linked off of our website. If you go to this events listing for the virtual tasting, you can get the links to these recipes, which Jeff has generously written up for us. So thanks, Jeff.
Absolutely, very excited, and thank you for being with me for so many years. And it's been a pleasure to be here at Tablas Creek, and the wines are tasting fantastic, Chelsea.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the kind of the future. One of the big things for our next few years is that we have been working on planting. A big chunk of this is on the beautiful section that we call Jewel Ridge. But it's not the only section that we've been planting. We've planted 32 acres of vineyard, including that cool sunburst pattern you see in the lower left. That was one of the ideas that Neil came up with. We have a block that you see on the top, which we're calling Cote Maduena, after our longtime vineyard manager, David Maduena, where we're alternating rows of Syrah and Grenache, hoping that the kind of tall, trellised, sprawling Syrah is going to help shade the Grenache a little bit and protect it from sunburn. And then we have a new Mourvedre block, which we're calling the Santos block, which is, there's a cool story behind. Neil, do you want to tell the story of the Santos block?
Yeah. Well, the first blocks that were planted at Tablas Creek were in 1992. And there was Mourvedre, Grenache, Syrah, Viognier, and Marsanne. And of those blocks, Mourvedre was still there, but it wasn't producing. We'd grafted it over to a few years ago, and it still didn't really produce very well. So we made the decision to pull it out and replant it to Mourvedre. And Jason mentioned David Meduena, the Meduena blocks named after the other longest serving employee here at Tablas Creek was Santos Espinosa, who was here, in my knowledge, since the very beginning. He was a very pivotal figure in the nursery program. When we were doing the nursery, he kind of ran that show and then just became really the fabric of outside in the vineyard of Tablas Creek. Such a lovely man. And he passed away. I forget the year. We decided to name the block after him, and well deserved after so many years of hard work in our vineyards here. And on the day that we planted, the picture you see is his wife and her grandkids. And there was even a grandkid somewhere in the picture here. So they came out and planted the first vines of the Santos block, which will be all Mourvedre also. Again, we go back to Mourvedre, but it was a really special day. The whole family came. There was probably 15 of Santos's children and grandchildren, and watching David Meduena working with Santos's grandkids, helping them plant vines, was one of the more moving moments of my Tablas Creek history for sure. So that will be a really treasured and special block for us, and we need the Mourvedre, and hopefully it has the fortitude of Santos himself moving forward.
Awesome. And big picture, this means that we know that we are scarce on wine at the moment. I mean, things have been selling out sometimes in a matter of a few days or a few weeks. It's rare that we have things that are actually around for the full year until the next release is out. And like that's something to be aware of. If there are things that you love and you see the release emails, we're going to tell you how much there is of them, and you might want to grab them quickly. But we're also trying to address that on our end and make more of things. So with 32 acres, that's a significant increase in what we have. So help is on the way. It's not going to help us imminently, but it's coming.
This is not an instant gratification business, and it takes a while.
Sure.
And we just fenced 2 new vineyard blocks too. Probably a total of about 6 acres that have been fenced and ready for planting. Obviously not next year, probably the year after. We'll go to undecided yet, but there'll be some Counoise involved in that with sure. But yeah, Jewel Ridge, so exciting to start getting fruit off of that section of this property. It is the jewel in the crown, I feel.
And just so you know, we've planted Mourvedre, Grenache, Counoise, Syrah, Roussanne, and Clairette Blanche in the last year. And there's more of those things and others coming. So, okay, but let's talk about the Panoply. I don't want to wait any longer for the kind of culminating wine, flagship wine. Panoply is our kind of homage to the top wine that they make at Beaucastel, which they call the Hommage à Jacques Perrin. It's the wine that Jean-Pierre and Francois Perrin made in honor of their father, Jacques, who was the one who kind of brought Beaucastel to its prominence in the 1950s. He was also a real champion of Mourvedre. Mourvedre was the most widely planted sorry, I was holding this up. The most widely planted red grape in the Châteauneuf-du-Pape region before the arrival of phylloxera in the late 19th century. And it turned out not to graft well onto the American rootstocks that were available in the aftermath of phylloxera. And so it was largely replaced by Grenache. But Jacques was a believer in Mourvedre, and he planted big chunks of the Beaucastel vineyard to it on the newly developed rootstocks that came out after World War II, and believed that it was the best thing that he had in his cellar in the years where it got ripe. And so the wine that his kids made in homage of his work is led by Mourvedre, and so is the Panoply. So this vintage is 62% Panoply, and then roughly equal parts, 22% Syrah and 16% Grenache. and it represents the top 2 or 3% of what comes into the cellar each vintage. Chelsea, do you want to talk about how in the blending trials we decide what makes the cut for Panoply?
Yeah. So the way we sit down and blend for both red and whites at Tablas Creek is, I think I mentioned earlier, we taste each of the individual varieties. And within those, so like say we're tasting Grenache for the afternoon, we might have 10 different picks of Grenache. So everything's hand harvested separately, it's fermented separately, and then aged separately. So we do have each of these components. We'll pull composites. So if a lot is 14 barrels, we'll take equal parts of each of those 14 barrels and then present that during the blind tasting. So because we all kind of have our preferences. So if you had a lot that you really, really loved during harvest and you gave a lot of care and attention to, that can kind of skew your perception of how it's tasting during this blind tasting component. So we always have everybody kind of hide what they're tasting, just so there's no favoritism. So we go through and everything's given a score from 1 to 3. So a 1 is something that has power, it has finesse, it has elegance. This is something that's definitely Esprit or Panoply worthy. A 2 is going to be something that's really friendly and fun to drink. It's got this great juiciness and vibrancy. A really great fit for Cote or varietal. And then a 3 is something that we typically earmark for something that, maybe it's still fermenting or maybe it's a little bit oxidized. This is something that just needs maybe a little bit more care and attention in the cellar. So we sit down, everybody that gives their scores, the things that get the most 1s and 3s, notes, sometimes people will taste it during the tasting and say, this is Panoply. So we'll go through and during this blending, during this tasting, we have these lots that are marked as, these are 1s, these are fantastic. And then within that, we'll even do deeper barrel selection. So when we lay them down in the cellar 1 high, we'll go through and taste and say, this is the Panoply barrel. So when Jason's talking about this is kind of the upper echelon of our property, again, it is definitely some of the best that we have to offer, but it's also things that are most appropriate for Panoply, which tends to have the most power and the most intensity than anything else that we create.
Cool. Neil, what do you, I know we think of this as being kind of the wine for someone to lay down. Do you have a favorite age range to drink Panoply or a description of how it's likely to change for people as it evolves?
First, I'd like to mention, playing off of, or not leading off of what you talked about with the homage to Jacques Pram, we have to remember, and not to want to become the Tablas Creek historian, but the first vintage of Panoply was going through the cellar with your father and him deciding on 2 barrels that he thought they were co-ferments of Mourvèdre and Grenache, 80% Mourvèdre, 20% Grenache, that he decided on that moment of tasting that we were going to bottle separately as something else, something special, something along the... So I think that's important to realize that that's where this grew out of, and that first vintage was 2000. And I can't remember how much we bottled in 2000, but it wasn't very much. I think we added a barrel to those
67
2.
cases.
How much?
67 cases.
There you go. So there's basically 25 in a barrel. So we made a blend, and that was our first vintage. So that's important, I think, to the tale. As far as the age, I think with all the wines, it depends on vintage. I mean, I definitely think it benefits with age. Tasting this one today, I feel a lot of structure on the back end of this particular vintage, like a lot of tannin. I think this one will be a particularly long-lived one, though it's really approachable today. I love the 2000 still. I think that's a really interesting vintage. I mean, they're long-lived. They're 20 years easily, all of them. I don't think there's one that we've made that isn't, and that's based on the fact that it's based in Mourvèdre, which ages really well. So it's so hard to say, Panoply, 25 years. it's an easy 15 to 20 on every vintage that we've made, in my opinion. That being said, I think this wine tastes great today too. And I think people can get too caught up in waiting for 20 years to open a bottle so it's at its peak. I mean, it's really good along the road to that point too. And I think that's a beauty of wine that sometimes people miss, is that waiting for that golden moment is a bit of a silly dream, because you don't know when that's going to be. You've got to buy so much Panoply that you can open a bottle each year and see how it's doing, really. And or follow what we do and follow what we're tasting and see where each vintage is going, because it's unpredictable and it fluctuates year to year. And I think that's the beauty of what we do, is there is no perfect moment. The perfect moment is when you open that bottle and it's singing at the table with you and your family, and the right food and the right moment. That's the ultimate moment. And yes, over 10 years, easy. I don't think there's a golden moment for this stuff, personally. That's my own view on it.
I do feel like, though, with the Tannat and the Complice that precluded this, those were so approachable and so beautiful. This one definitely needs a decant if you're going to be opening this anytime soon.
Yeah.
This one definitely.
My point is, you're not going to be disappointed if you do. If you open this with a barely cooked ribeye steak, it's not going to ruin your evening.
It's worth. I'd like to give a little shout out to the vintage chart that we maintain. Somebody asked, Bill asked, said that they have at least a 10-year vertical of Panoply. Is there an age and readiness chart? Yes, there is. We have on our website a vintage chart that we update at least every 3 months, sometimes more often. And whenever we do, say, a vertical tasting or a retrospective tasting of any sort, that gives you our best guess as to what stage a wine is drinking at. So, Ian, maybe you can drop the link to the vintage chart in the chat. It's also the updated copy of that chart is also in every wine club insert. So the little packet that you get in your wine club shipments has in the middle one of those vintage charts. So it'll give you a sense of at least what our guess is as to how each of the wines that we've made over the last 25 years has been drinking.
I think that's a really important clarification to make, is it's a guideline. You know, it's not an absolute, because not even Jason opens these bottles every single day, every one of them, you know, so they're all moving, they're all fluctuating. It's the best guideline that you're going to find anywhere in the world to what Tablas Creek's doing, but it is that. Yep,
for sure. Cool. Thanks, Sarah. Ryan asked if he can be invited to the vertical tasting that we do. Yes, you can. This is actually a perfect segue into the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is sort of what's coming next for us, because we've got we're starting to do some of our educational events and live events again. We hosted 2012 retrospective tasting. It's a photo of like the setup as we were waiting for people to arrive in our cellar. Chelsea and I hosted that early March, and that was a look at 10 wines from the 2012 vintage. We're gonna every summer we do a vertical tasting, which is essentially look at the same wine from a whole range of different vintages. So we're going to be looking at our Syrah, our varietal Syrah. We just set the date of August 21st, which is a Sunday. So it's on the upcoming events page that Ian looks like he just fed into the feed. So please check it out. We will also be announcing it by email, but it's always on the upcoming events page first. So yes, we are starting to do that. We're also starting to appear in festivals, which is exciting. Like I went down to San Diego last weekend to celebrate the craft festival at the Lodge at Torrey Pines, which is always wonderful. Both Neil and Chelsea have gone and done that in past years. It's one that we all kind of fight over who gets to go. I'm going to be heading to Aspen for Aspen Food and Wine. We're going to be participating in the Wine Spectators Grand Tour. So we're probably coming somewhere near you, hopefully coming somewhere near you, wherever you are.
I'll be in Crested Butte in July.
Neil is taken the Colorado mountain trip that we have coming in the summer. So we're starting to get back out, which is great. But we're also continuing to do virtual events, not just these sorts of things, but also like the Instagram live conversations that I've been doing over the last couple of years. I've had some really cool guests recently, like Master Sommeliers Evan Goldstein and Alpina Singh. At the top of that, winemakers Morgan Twain Peterson and Carol Meredith. But these are something that has turned out to be a really kind of cool outgrowth of the things we needed to learn how to do during COVID, and that we've continued. I'm going to have Katie Wallace, who's the national wine buyer for Whole Foods, is going to be joining me not next week, but the week after for my next guest. It's going to be, it's really fun. And I think Neil, who took a little break on doing the tastings with other winemakers, virtual tastings with other winemakers, we have plans to get those started again the second half of this year. And we'll continue to look for opportunities to do tastings, virtual tastings with either organizations or wine shops or festivals in your areas too. So that's coming. Neil, what are you looking forward to in your world? What comes next for you?
Wow. Just looking forward to the year progressing again. You know, bud break is always exciting. The new plantings are more than exciting, and we're putting more grapes in the ground this year. I mean, I think just continuing down the path and moving it forward and another harvest. And I mean, I look forward to the year every year, particularly this time. It's exciting when the buds start pushing and we start to get a view of what the year is going to bring us. You know, we're scared of frost, but that's okay. That's what we do every year. We'll get beyond that. We'll get into May and June, and it's exciting. Every year is exciting to watch the growth and watch the vineyard progressing. And I'm excited to play more of the new clonal selections, and we'll see more fruit off of Jewel Ridge this year, which is going to be exciting. I'm just excited about the usual things I'm excited about, which is being here and farming and making wine and being a part of this team. I mean, it's doesn't change that much for me. Every year is exciting. We're progressing, we're moving, we're getting better at farming, getting better at farming with the environment in mind. It's every year just pushes it further forward. And people ask me how I've been here for such a long time. It's like, well, where else am I going to go? I mean, this is for me, this is the pinnacle of what's going on in our industry, and this is where I'd like to be. Yeah, so that's what's exciting for me.
Awesome. How about you, Chelsea?
I think, looking forward, we finished blending the 2021 whites, and we are making one of every single individual variety that we make of the whites, which is so cool. Some of them are going to go super fast, like tiny amounts. But the fact that you can buy Picardon and Beurre Blanc and Picpoul and Claret. So we are doing one of everything, which is...
Is there another winery in the world that does that?
I
can safely say there is not, given that when we planted our half acre of Picardin, it increased the world's footprint of Picardin by 40%. Yeah. There's nobody else doing this.
That's really, really cool. And they're all so distinctive and so uniquely their own. I think, Neil talking about just going out into the vineyard and seeing that new life, just that whole cycle starting again. When you work at a winery, it's so cyclical and it just kind of comes around again. But each time it's so ridiculously different and so unique to that particular year. So the fact that we are starting that process all over again is just, it's kind of annoying how magical it is. But this is the beginning all over again, it's really cool to be a part of that and kind of, starting to build our cellar team for the 2022 vintage. All of these things, it's just, one thing comes after the next and clicking into place, and it's really cool to be a part of.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I think that's probably the right note to...
What are you excited about, Jason? What's your... You have to answer that question too.
Okay. Well, I am excited to taste the reds to dive into the reds from 2021. The whites were super encouraging. Reds come in a couple of weeks. We're going to get to see César Perrin. So we're going to get a Perrin visit for the first time since 2019 as the pandemic kind of loosens its grip on all of us a little bit. I'm excited to see what he thinks of all of the stuff that we're working on. I'm a real believer in the power of incremental improvement, that if you can do a handful of things a little bit better each year than you did the year before, that the cumulative impact over the course of years and decades is really dramatic. And I think that where we are now with the ROC Gold is super exciting. I think that where we are in the cellar with all 14 of those varieties coming in 2021 and enough quantities to assess and do something with is incredibly exciting. And 30 years in, I feel like we're in a place that we've never been able to be before, and I can't wait to see what we do in the next couple of decades. So I think it's not you never get to the place that you imagine you're going to, but you get to places that are totally fascinating on the way. And I think that's the joy of being involved in this. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to this year being 4.5% better than last year, and continuing to do that each year for the foreseeable future.
I love it.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody who joined us today. I so appreciated all of your questions. We are so grateful for your patronage. The last couple of years have not unfolded the way that any of us thought they would, or certainly hoped they would. But I feel like we're in an amazing place right now. We have the opportunity to get back to doing a lot of the things that we got used to doing before the pandemic, and then incorporate the stuff we learned how to do during the pandemic. And I know that I feel like I've learned more over the last 2 years than I learned in the decade before that. So thank you for being a part of all of this over the last couple of difficult years. I can't wait to show you all the stuff that we'll be working on in the future. So again, thank you for joining us. I hope you get a chance to come out and see us. But if not, we'll do our best to come and see you. And at the very least, we'll keep doing these sorts of things. So we'll see each other in whatever virtual space this is.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I appreciate all the support for sure. Keeps me interested and inspired.
Well, thanks so
Awesome.
much.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you, Ian, behind the scenes.